Hey, Shoddy, it's your book day. Gonna podcast like it's your book day.
What happened to the other thing you had planned?
That's the outro.
Oh.
This is the intro. Hey, everybody, welcome to LiteraryAF Podcast. My name is Sheldon.
I'm Danni.
And we're here today to talk to you about...
Books.
The weather.
Right.
Books.
Well.
Darn. I'd prepared a whole weather podcast.
It's kind of cold today.
Sunny. All right, now on to the books. All right. Well, we got a jam-packed one for you today. Or I don't know if it's gonna be jam-packed. I'm talking about a book called A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. This book was written in the 60s, the 1960s. Here, actually, I'm going to pull up the Wikipedia because there's some interesting stuff on here.
All right.
Okay. Wait, that's not the interesting part. Okay, so, this book was finished in 1969. No, this book was finished sometime during the 60s, but the author committed suicide in 1969 without having ever published it. So then the author's mother, who had apparently had some experience publishing works,
Right.
She found the book and published it in 1980. And it became like, first it started as a cult classic, but then within like a year it won like a Pulitzer Prize, and it got pretty famous. There's a whole bunch of quotes on the back about how great it is from like Washington Post, Newsweek, New Republic, Baltimore Sun. Like it's got a lot of acclaim.
Yep.
The title, Confederacy of Dunces, comes from a Jonathan Swift essay. This is all from the Wikipedia. I did not do that much research.
Right.
It says, when a true genius appears in the world, you may know him by this sign, that the dunces are all in confederacy against him. And so it's kind of like a clever play on what's actually happening in this book. The main character is thinks he's a genius, but he's a total buffoon, and he's super funny. And he thinks the entire world is against him, but really he's just like the most obnoxious person ever born. It's very good, and this book is pretty funny. I'll tell you that right now.
Good. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Better than the last one.
Count of Monte Cristo? Oh, no, better than your last one.
Yeah, my last one.
Yeah, no, well, there's some similar things that happen. No, not at all, really. But no, so this is pretty good. Okay, so the book starts with Ignatius P. Riley, who's the main character of this book.
Yep.
I think his middle initial's P. Doesn't really matter.
Right.
Ignatius. He's waiting outside of he's waiting outside a department store for his mother, who's going in to buy cakes for him. Ignatius is very large. He's tall and very rotund. He's a big boy.
You big boy. Yep.
He wears it takes place in New Orleans, where I'm guessing it's pretty hot most of the time. But he anyway wears a large flannel shirt, a big scarf, and a huge green hunting cap. Like one of those like winter hats with like the flaps on the side. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah. So he's got one of those on. He's got like a huge mustache. That's another descriptor of him. And his eyes are always described as being very blue and very yellow. So that's our hero of the book. As he's waiting outside, he's reflecting on how all the people around him are probably stupid or degenerates. He's a very like mean person, while his mom is inside getting cakes and cookies for him, and also like complaining to the shopkeeper about how hard her life is because of her like demanding son. Mm-hmm. So that's what the mother's doing. Outside, Ignatius is I can't remember what he was sitting for a bit, and then he was standing, and then his feet are starting to hurt, and he's thinking like, he can't wait to like let his mom have it for making him wait. Right. And he's just like plotting like what he's gonna do next. And his thing too, so he's unemployed, he lives with his mother. Okay. And he wants to become the like next great author of the world.
Right.
But his ideas are very dumb. He has a graduate degree in medieval studies, and seems to think that like the height of intelligence was like 1,000 years ago, and everything after that has just been like nonsense.
Oh no.
He's like standing there. I can't remember what he's thinking, but it's the beginning's pretty funny. And then a random random police officer named Patrolman Mancuso, comes up, and he thinks this guy is like a weird character, thinks he's gonna be trouble. So he goes up to the guy and asks for ID, and then Ignatius, like being like, so his character is just very difficult. Part of the reason why he's very funny is like he's very quick to anger for always no reason.
Right.
His description words are always stuff like bellows or shouts angrily or like
excellent
stuff like that.
Yeah. So he's loud.
He's very loud, but also just like very aggressive for no reason.
All right.
So the cop comes up, and then he immediately accuses the cop of being a communist spy. Oh no, not immediately. That's what actually ends the confrontation.
Okay.
I can't remember what he first accuses him of, but he like starts yelling at the cop, and he's like, "Oh, you're attacking a poor young man waiting for his mother at the store." And like the cop's like, "No, I'm not attacking you. I'm just asking for ID." And then like they're arguing back and forth, and then eventually it escalates to him calling the cop a communist. And then the cop threatens to arrest him, and then the mother comes out and she joins in on yelling at the cop, and then somehow a random old man in the crowd who is like worked up about this communist stuff, he comes in there and he starts yelling at the cop, and eventually the cop arrests the old man while
oh boy,
Ignatius and his mother run off.
Okay.
So then what happens is Ignatius and his mother head to a local bar to cool down. He doesn't want to be there because he's very judgmental, and he thinks everyone in the area is like horrible degenerates and trollops, and he like insults everybody with like all these terms from like medieval times. It's pretty good.
Right.
He's sitting in the bar, and then like they're having a drink. Let's see. He's trying to get a Dr. Nut, which I think is Dr. Pepper. Okay. But I'm not too sure. He's always trying to drink Dr. Nut.
All right. If this was one of my books, I'd have jokes.
Yeah,
but
it would be something different. He's sitting there with his mom. They had driven to the department store or something, because he's talking about the car. I have to read this one story he tells because it comes up so often.
All right.
That it would just, and plus so you guys can get a feel for how he talks and stuff. Okay, so he says, "Actually, even riding in a car affects me enough. Of course, the worst thing is riding on top of one of those Greyhound scenic cruisers. So high up. Do you remember the time I went to Baton Rouge in one of those? I vomited several times. The driver had to stop the bus somewhere in the swamp to let me get off and walk around for a while. The other passengers were rather angry. They must have had stomachs of iron to hide in that awful machine. Leaving New Orleans also frightened me considerably. Outside of the city limits, the heart of darkness, the true wasteland begins."
Heart of darkness.
His mom replies, "I remember that Ignatius," Mrs. Riley said absently, drinking her beer in gulps. "You was really sick when you got back home." "I felt better then. The worst moment was at my arrival in Baton Rouge. I realized I had a round-trip ticket and would have to return on the bus." "You told me that, babe. The taxi back to New Orleans cost me $40, but at least I wasn't violently ill during the taxi ride. Although I felt myself beginning to gag several times, I made the driver go very slowly, which was unfortunate for him. The state police stopped him twice for driving below the minimum highway speed limit. On the third time that they stopped him, they took away his chauffeur's license. You see, they had been watching us on radar the entire way." Mrs. Riley's not paying attention. "Of course," Ignatius continued. "That was the only time that I'd ever been out of New Orleans in my life. I think that perhaps it was the lack of a center of orientation that might have upset me. Speeding along in that bus was like hurtling into the abyss. By the time we had left the swamps and reached those rolling hills near Baton Rouge, I was getting afraid that some rural rednecks might toss bombs at the bus.
Wow.
They love to attack vehicles, which are a symbol of progress."
Wait, when you said this was like the 60s?
Yeah.
All right.
And then, she's like, "Well, I'm glad you didn't take the job." "I couldn't possibly take that job." So he was going there for a job interview. "When I saw the chairman of the medieval cultural department, my hands began breaking out in small white bumps. He was a totally soulless man. Then he made a comment about my not wearing a tie, and made some smirky remark about my lumberjacket. I was appalled that so meaningless a person would dare such effrontery. That lumberjacket was one of the few creature comforts to which I've ever been really attached. And if I ever find the lunatic who stole it, I shall report him to the authorities. And then there's a little aside about how Mrs. Riley had donated his jacket because it was horrible, coffee stained, and she hated it.
Right.
You see, I was so overwhelmed by the complete grossness of that spurious chairman that I ran from his office in the middle of one of his cretinous ramblings and rushed to the nearest bathroom, which turned out to be one for faculty men. At any rate, I was seated in one of the booths, having rested the lumberjacket on top of the door of the booth. Suddenly I saw the jacket being whisked over the door. I heard footsteps. Then the door of the restroom closed. At that moment I was unable to pursue the shameless thief, so I began to scream. Someone entered the bathroom and knocked at the door of the booth. It turned out to be a member of the campus security force, or so he said. Through the door, I explained what had just happened. He promised to find the jacket and went away. Actually, as I've mentioned before, I have always suspected that this chairman and the security guard were the same person. Their voices sounded somewhat similar. As soon as I could, I fled from the bathroom, eager only to get away from that horrible place. Of course, I was almost frozen standing on that desolate campus trying to hail a taxi. I finally got one that agreed to take me to New Orleans for $40, and the driver was selfless enough to lend me his jacket. By the time we arrived here, however, he was quite depressed about losing his license and had grown rather surly. He also appeared to be developing a bad cold, judging by the frequency of his sneezes. After all, we were on the highway for almost 2 hours.
Oof.
Yeah, that's basically the end of the bus story.
Right.
But he brings up the bus story every time he's ever asked to, like, go to work or, like, do anything with a job. He's like, oh, think about the last time I tried to get a job.
Right.
And so that was his excuse for never getting a job again. Meanwhile, the bar they're in, I think it's called A Night of Joy.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a strip club, but they're there in the middle of the afternoon, so there's no strippers out. And they meet one of the girls from the bar. Her name is Darlene, and Darlene and the mom start kind of bonding, and the mom's sharing cakes with her. And then something comes up about a bus, or about how the mom doesn't want to hear the bus story again. But then Darlene's like, oh, what's that about a bus? And then Ignatius launches into the full story again. While they're there, then they go over to the police station to do like this book has a lot of like little asides.
Mm-hmm.
So then they have an aside at the police station where Mancuso brings in this old man. At this station, the old man is waiting, and he's talking to a young African-American gentleman. So this book was written in the 60s, so there's a lot of words like Negro and stuff being thrown around.
Right.
I'll get into that just a little bit later, but so he's talking to this guy named Jones. Jones wears dark sunglasses and is always smoking. That's like his two things.
Right.
Him and Jones are talking, and then he's like, what are you in for, old man? And the old man's like, it's because the cop's a communist and I called him out for it. And then the Jones is like, no way, a real genuine communist. I can't believe it. I'm in here because I'm black. And then he was basically like, he was unemployed and the police were accusing him of being a vagrant. So they dragged him into the station. Or no, they dragged him in for being a character or something. Mm-hmm. That word gets thrown around a lot in this book because everybody in this, like, the French Quarter of New Orleans is kind of a character.
A character, yeah.
And so they brought in Jones for, like, no real reason, according to him. And the old man for also no real reason. Mancuso gets busted by his sergeant and is like, how come you brought in a nice old man? And then he's like, no, he's not nice. He attacked me in front of a crowd. And then the old man's like, yeah, because this guy was trying to arrest a poor boy just waiting for his mama. And then the sergeant gets mad at Mancuso again. And he's like, that's it. You're on undercover duty all week. And Mancuso is constantly, he comes up a lot in this book. And he's constantly getting, like, demoted at his job, usually because of Ignatius.
Great.
It's pretty good. So then it goes back to Ignatius at the bar. His mom is getting, like, drunk, and Ignatius is like sipping on a sherry or something. And then the owner of the bar, Miss Lana Lee, comes up and starts yelling at them, how come you're serving these people in my bar? She's yelling at Darlene for talking to them. And then She's like, these are the type of characters who'll get a business shut down. Like, you don't want these people in your bar. They're a kiss of death. And then Ignatius starts calling her a Nazi, and they start arguing, and then she eventually kicks them both out. And then, so they get in the car, and Ignatius can't drive, so his mom gets behind the wheel. His incredibly drunk mom, like, drives like a block or two and then crashes into a building. And then that's where the first chapter ends. Second chapter, they're at home. And the building they've crashed into is the guy's like making them pay for the damages. And she doesn't have a job, and neither does Ignatius. And so she's like not sure how they're going to pay. I think she's living off of like either some sort of government assistance or else like a pension of some kind. She talks about how like Ignatius was in school for 8 years. He's got a graduate degree. How while he was in school, he got hooked up with this awful woman named Myrna Minkov, who will come up many times in this book. She was like a student anarchist, and she was weird like Ignatius, but in a different way. And a lot of the stories of the two are like her trying to seduce him and him loudly crying, "Leave me alone, I'm a virgin."
Oh.
And it's pretty good. So talking about how him and Myrna would fight all the time. Him and Myrna are like still in contact through letters, and they still fight all the time. A lot of this book is Ignatius trying to prove Myrna wrong and getting himself in a ton of trouble. So she doesn't know what to do, so she tells Ignatius he has to get a job to pay for these damages. Because it was her fault. It was his fault that they were in that bar in the first place or whatever. And so he's all mad about this. He can't handle it. There's also a letter from Myrna. There's a lot of scenes in this book where Ignatius is just like laying in his room all day and like writing in his book and like masturbating constantly.
Oh. All right.
It's not like graphically described. But it's kind of funny. He is mad at his mom. Oh, the patrolman who tried to arrest them, he stops by and he's talking to the mom and he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, blah, blah, blah." Then as he gets to know her a little bit, he's like, "You know what? You would really get along well with my aunt. Like, you should come bowling with me and my aunt sometime." And she's like, "Oh, I don't bowl. I can't possibly bowl." It's like, "Come on, it'd do good to get out of the house every once in a while." And then Ignatius comes downstairs and starts yelling at the patrolman again. And that's kind of how that chapter ends. I'm not going to do chapter by chapter for the rest, but so Ignatius goes on a hunt for a job. He finds out about a job at an office for a place called Levi Pants, which I think is supposed to be like a play on Levi jeans. But so he goes to work for this office. The office manager is a like weak-willed soft man named Mr. Gonzalez, who is like so desperate for staff that he's willing to do anything. And basically he caves into Ignatius' demands, which are like, he gives the worst job interview in the world. Like, he demands more money, he demands less work, and he demands that his car fare be paid, like taxi be covered from work to home every day. But Gonzalez eventually gives in. On Ignatius' first day, he convinces the other office employees to leave, other than Tim, Gonzalez, and then an older lady, like 80s, named Trixie, I think, Miss Trixie.
Okay.
Miss Trixie has been trying to retire for years, but the owner of the factory's wife, Mrs. Levy, won't let this woman retire because she thinks that if she retires, she'll have no purpose in life anymore.
Oh.
But all this woman wants is to retire.
Just wants to retire? Yeah.
So it's pretty funny. Ignatius, convinces the other workers to leave or convinces Gonzalez to fire them, saying that they're plotting a rebellion against him. Then Ignatius starts like doing these weird projects where he's like painting signposts around the office. And then Gonzalez is like, "Oh, don't you think you should be doing your filing?" And then Ignatius is like, "Oh yeah, of course, it doesn't take long, blah blah blah." So Ignatius eventually realizes that that in order to do what he wants to focus on, he has to get the filing out of the way quick. So he just starts throwing everything in the garbage.
Ah, of course.
Such a great employee. He meets Mr. Levy. Mr. Levy is like he doesn't want anything to do with the factory. It was like his father's, and then after his father died, he inherited it. But like the place is like going down the rails, and rather than fixing anything, he just would like to pretend it doesn't exist. So he doesn't even sign his own paperwork. He makes Gonzalez do it for him. So then one day, they get like an order or one of their orders gets canceled for a company or something, or
Right.
the order gets cut back, and they're all worried because, oh, we need that money. But then Ignatius is like, well, you shouldn't let them push you around like that. So then he throws out the letter that Gonzalez had prepared, and he writes one himself where it's like, you horrible miscreants, how dare you, Levy Pants is an institution, and he tears like a strip off them and like insults them, calls them like mongoloids and stuff, and then like copies Gonzalez's signature on the bottom, then just sends that away instead. That letter will come back later in the book.
I imagine, yeah.
Then him and this whole time, this whole time, you see scenes at the bar. Lana Lee is like, she hires Jones, who's like desperate for a job, but she's paying him like below minimum wage, and he's to sweep the floors, and he's constantly like trying to find ways to get back at her, but she's always threatening to take him into the police if he quits his job. So he's like trying to find ways to sabotage her. She's also got this little scheme going on where she's giving these like little packages to a young man who claims that he belongs to an orphanage charity. I can't remember what it's called, like the United Fund or something. That's going to come up again later too, so I thought I should get that out of the way. Also, Ignatius's mother and Mancuso's aunt are constantly going out bowling, and Mancuso's aunt her name is like, it's like Santa Bagliacci or something. It's like a very like Italian or Spanish name or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But so she's constantly trying to get the mother to like go and have more fun and not to worry about her son. And Mrs. Riley is constantly complaining about Ignatius everywhere. Do you know what my son did? And like stuff like that. I should also mention Ignatius claims to have a valve in his chest that seals shut whenever he is under stress. So he must never be stressed out too much, or else the valve will seal shut. I think it's supposed to be a digestive issue because he's constantly belching and like having intense stomach issues whenever this valve acts up. But it's very much an invented medical condition that he just complains about whenever he has the slightest stress in his life.
Of course.
And he's getting letters from Myrna Minkov all the time talking about this great new thing she's doing in New York, how she's very socially aware, and they're putting on a play, and she has this brilliant young actress from Harlem. Myrna is constantly like meeting men and women, it sounds like, who like are interested in her sexually, or like she does something sexual with them, but then they immediately abandon her and they won't support her causes. And she gets very like upset because she's constantly getting duped by these people. But her causes all sound very ridiculous and stupid. Anyway, so she's planning this thing, and so Ignatius thinks that he needs to do something socially aware that will like one up her. Like that's his whole scheme. So what he does is he goes into the factory at Levy Pants, and there's a lot of like men of color working there, and he basically convinces them that they're going to rise up and go to the office to declare to demand a living wage. However, he gets them like really riled up and equips them with weapons and tries to go upstairs.
Wait, weapons?
Yeah, like he gets them to bring in like sticks and rocks and like knives and stuff to try to scare the manager.
Okay.
But then as soon as they're upstairs, then he's like, attack him! And they're like, wait, no, we just want a living wage. And then he's like, now's your chance, take him down! And then, so Ignatius ends up getting fired. The factory workers did not attack the manager. Mr. Gonzalez is fine. And he also befriended Miss Trixie while there, the 80-year-old woman.
Right.
So then he's out on the street again. His mother's really disappointed. Santa is trying to set her up with this old man she met who's really interested in her. I don't think it's clear right from the start, but like as soon as she said old man, I was like, oh, I bet it's the old man from the beginning, and it was. So she's trying to set him up with that old man for whatever reason. But Ignatius is in the way, of course. Ignatius, meanwhile, has no job, and she sends him out looking. And he, instead of going out looking for the job, and she was giving him money every day for like taxi and lunch, what he would do is just walk to the nearby movie theater and just spend the money on the movies and snacks,
Right.
and then come back home.
Right.
So she figured this out and then cut off his money. While walking, he comes across this like warehouse that smells like, it's described as like a horrible smell, but it's like processed food smell, and it ends up being like a hot dog vendor like warehouse where they have the like little carts that they send out into the city. And he's so enthralled by the smell that he immediately eats 4 hot dogs. And then the old man who's there is like, great, so that's going to be $1. And then he's like, oh, well, I don't have any money for you. Take this as a lesson learned, old man. Then the old man attacks Ignatius with a fork. And basically they come to the deal that if Ignatius will work for him for 1 hour, he won't have to pay for the hot dogs he's eaten.
Right.
Ignatius takes the cart, makes it around the block. He eats all the hot dogs himself.
Right.
And then he runs into a teen boy who is the same teen boy who's distributing these packages for Lana Lee. This boy is like his name is like George, I think, and he's like a little scamp. Well, he wants a hot dog, but Ignatius won't sell him one because he's like, I will not be contributing to the degeneracy of youth or something.
All right.
So the one customer he finds, he won't sell him anything.
Right.
And so the kid starts yelling at him, and then I think the kid like throws something at him, and the cart tips over, and Ignatius runs back to the warehouse, and the guy's like, what, I told you to work for me for an hour and you couldn't even make it 15 minutes. And he's like, I was attacked, I was robbed. And then he feeds him this whole story about how the kid robbed him, and he's like, oh no, he got all your money. He's like, no, he didn't take the money, he took the hot dogs. And then so they're having this weird argument, and Ignatius is like, he's lying constantly, and he's so like, it's so hard to describe him, but he's like very aggressive about his lies, and nobody believes him, but also at the same time they're just like so outlandish, like what do you even say to that? So that's what's going on with him. And then he goes home. They decide that he's going to keep working for this hot dog vendor because the guy's really desperate for staff, because they're getting a bad reputation around town because only bums sell hot dogs. So Ignatius says he needs to borrow a uniform to prove to his mother that he's found a job. But when he gets home, she's distraught because he's a hot dog vendor, and all hot dog vendors are bums because apparently they have that reputation.
Right.
But so she's like really starting to get worried for him. She's like really like, what do I do? His job as the vendor, like he's basically just going around and eating the hot dogs himself and not bringing any money back. So the guy's not paying him really. Like he's giving him like, it sounds like he's getting paid based on how many sales he makes. So it sounds like most days he's getting like 50 cents. I think one day it says he made $4 for the entire day work. And the mother's like getting really worried, like we're never gonna be able to pay off this debt.
Right.
Ignatius is like decides that the easiest way to do his job is to take his cart to places where there are no people hanging around. So he's like going to like weird like abandoned industrial sections of the city, or like hanging out in a park and just leaving his cart parked on the street. Like he's like, oh, it's really funny. It's hard to do this book justice because the way things are described is very funny,
right,
more so than the events themselves.
Right.
He also is flagged by a health inspector because one day, instead of selling hot dogs, he was playing with a cat that he found in the street. And he was trying to shove the cat into his cart so he could take the cat home, but the cat was like beating him up. He's getting all scratched up. And the health inspector was like, he's trying to shove a live cat into a food cart. So then he gets in trouble, and the guy's like, you have one last chance to prove yourself. Like, if you don't make $5 today running this cart, like, I'm going to attack you with the fork or something. I can't remember what the threat is.
There's a lot of, like, I'm going to attack you with a fork. The old man attacked him with a fork.
Oh, there's lots of attacking in general in this book. Yeah, so he goes out, and then he runs into... also, there's a lot of the subplots going on at this point, too. Like, I don't have time to get into them all, and it's very, like... It's not confusing while you're reading it, but it's kind of confusing to try to describe it.
Right.
But so like Mr. Levy and his wife are fighting all the time. she's trying to do good. She's trying to do like social justice work, and he's just trying to like live off his money. Uh, her big project is Miss Trixie from The Office, the 80-year-old lady.
Right.
Eventually, they take Miss Trixie home so she can give Miss Trixie a makeover. And the old woman's like very senile and confused and doesn't want to be there and keeps thinking she's been kidnapped, and or she thinks she's still at the factory. It's kind of funny. And also the lady keeps trying to help, or Mrs. Levy keeps trying to help Miss Trixie, but Trixie keeps like attacking her and screaming at her. And then she buys Miss Trixie false teeth, and then Miss Trixie just uses them to try to bite her all the time. And then also to the old man, his name is Claude Robichaud. He's been introduced to Mrs. Riley. I think her name's Irene. And they're like kind of hitting it off, but Ignatius, of course, is standing in the way. There's also lots of letters with Myrna Minkov. Myrna's very concerned. Mancuso was looking for suspicious characters in the French Quarter, and he got beat up by 3 lesbian women who show up again later.
All right.
And then the cops are so like, oh, and the other characters, and like there's a gay guy who shows up a little later who befriends Ignatius, and he was like, oh yeah, we've been calling the police on the undercover cop. So Mancuso keeps having the cops called on him.
Right.
And yeah, that's the sheriff ends up busting him down to bathroom. No, it's like the bus station bathroom duty to look for suspicious characters in there. And then Mancuso starts to catch pneumonia because it's a cold, dark, wet bathroom. And
just hangs out in the bathroom.
Has to sit in the stall for 8 hours a day and keep an eye out for suspicious activity.
Great.
And they enjoy dressing him up in weird costumes every day. That's like his punishment. And yeah, so... Oh, and at one point, Mancuso found... Ignatius had given his mother a book to give to Mancuso, written by some Boethius, which is like a late Roman philosopher, I think.
Okay.
It could be way off, but that's what it's somewhere before the medieval period. And then so he wants Mancuso to read it because it'll make his life better. Mancuso gets insanely bored while reading it and drops it in the bathroom stall. And it gets grabbed by the kid, by George, who's delivering Lana Lee's packages around town.
Right.
So then back to Ignatius, he's on his like final warning at work. He's all worried because he has to sell $5 worth of hot dogs that day, and also because his favorite actress is in a new movie coming out that day, and he has to see it to see what depraved stuff they make her do. Like, so he goes to the movies every day, but always complains that they're like the worst, and there's like no morality in them, and they're awful, and he like constantly gets kicked out of the movies because he's shouting at the screen and stuff. But he's determined to go to this one on opening day.
Right.
So he's not sure what he's going to do. And then the kid who delivers the packages comes up and says, hey, I've got to hold on to these packages until 3 p.m. I'll give you money if you let me store them in your cart. And Ignatius is like, ooh, that means I'll have the money to pay off, to pretend I like the $5 I need to keep my job.
Right.
And also money to go to the movies.
Right.
So he accepts the kid's money and then says, I'll only do it for you if you promise to look after the cart this afternoon. I have a very important meeting. And the kid's like, no, I'm giving you the money so you'll look after them. But like Ignatius leaves the kid with the cart and goes to the movies.
Great.
When he comes out, before he goes, he rips open one of the packages because he refuses to hold on to them without seeing what it is.
Right.
In the package is a stack of photographs. It's a homemade pornography.
Oh.
So this was the 60s, so I don't know what the rules were in porn back then, but it sounds like it's illegal to distribute. And also, it's being sold at the high schools, like by this kid, and Lana Lee is like facilitating it.
Okay.
But this is supposed to be like a school teacher set or something, I guess, for the high school kids.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a naked woman with a book in front of her face, and the book just happens to be the one that George stole from the bathroom. So it's Ignatius's favorite book, which he lent to Mancuso. So he sees the book and he immediately decides that the woman in this picture must be some like tortured genius who loves Boethius as much as he does and is being held captive by these horrible people.
That's a stretch.
Yeah. He's also... So the whole book, he's very, like, anti-sex and very, like, anti-whatever.
Right.
Partly because I think Myrna is very pro-sex and he's always trying to be the opposite of her.
Right.
And so, but seeing these books, he's like, oh, like, I should go have sex with this woman to prove to Myrna. That's one of his schemes. His other scheme, which I forgot, which is, like, the main plot of the end of this book,
right,
is he is downtown in the French Quarter selling hot dogs, and he sees there's like some outdoor art exhibit, and he's like insulting all the ladies who painted these pictures. He's like just like roasting them so hard, and they're like telling him to leave and begging him to get out, and he won't. And oh yeah, when he goes to the French Quarter, he's given a costume to wear. He's supposed to dress up like a pirate. However, Ignatius has gotten much fatter since starting to work for the hot dog company because he's doing nothing but eating 12 hot dogs a day.
Yeah.
So he can't fit into the pirate costume. So what he does is he takes the pirate scarf and he wraps it around his head. He takes the plastic sword and shoves it in his belt. And then he takes the fake earring and puts it on. So he's dressed up he's dressed up like that. And a guy from the beginning of the book who bought Ignatius's mom's hat at the bar. It's like a very unimportant character at the beginning of the book. I didn't even mention him. He shows up and he sees Ignatius and he's like, "What are you dressed as?" This character is like very like painted as very gay, and he sees Ignatius and he like starts calling him the Gypsy Queen and stuff. And Ignatius tries to fight him with his sword, and then like this guy thinks Ignatius is like the funniest guy alive, and then he's kind of joking around with Ignatius, and Ignatius is like so just aggressive and trying to fight him the entire time. And then they see another local gay man who's dressed as a sailor. And then the first guy he talks to, whose name is Dorian Green, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Dorian Green mentions that, he's not really a sailor, he's just dressed up that way. And Ignatius is at first furious because how dare you impersonate a member of the naval forces. And then he gets the idea that if all gay men started dressing up as servicemen, they could take over the United States, and instead of wars they could have gay orgies, and in that way they would bring peace to their time. So then the guy's like, "You're really funny," and then he's like, "Gather a group of all your like gay friends, we're gonna have a party, we're gonna found this political party." But Dorian Green thinks he means like a party. So he invites all his friends over for a big party. Ignatius, meanwhile, writes this to Myrna, like, I gotta find the actual telegraph because it's one of the funnier things of the book. Sorry, I should pause this maybe, but I refuse.
We fly by the seat of our pants here at Literary AF.
Yeah, I just finished this book about an hour ago.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, we're recording this one the same time as we're doing the last episode, so...
Yeah, so don't tell anybody.
Wanted to get it all out before we could forget.
Okay,
we
I found it.
had two very different experiences with our books.
Wait, I don't think I found it. Dang it. I know it's in the start of one of the letters from Myrna Minkov.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found one of her letters, but it was a previous letter. They're like formatted different on the page, so I can see where they are.
Oh, okay, yeah, you can just flip through it.
Okay. Here's the telegram that he said to Myrna.
Okay.
Myrna, form Peace Party Central Committee, Northeastern Zone at once. Stop. Organize at every level. Stop. Recruit sodomites only. Stop. Sex in politics. Stop. Details will follow. Stop. Ignatius, national chairman. Stop. And so she's very concerned that Ignatius is gay now. And she's like insinuating like, we're really worried about you, and he's mad because she's seeing him as a sexual object rather than a political adversary.
Right.
So he gets very mad about her letter, but his whole plan was she would start one up in New York, he would start one in the South, and they would like spread to take over the whole country. He goes to the party, and it is like an actual party. There's like people drinking, they're listening to music. I kind of had a weird feeling during this party because they're not like gay, they're like cartoonishly gay.
Oh yeah, they're.
And I don't know if it was like a time period thing or if like it's supposed to be like, because like every character in this book is like a wild character. There's
Right.
nobody who's like normal. So like I don't know if it's just supposed to be like everyone's flamboyant in this book, so these people are like also flamboyant. But I still got like a little icky reading this chapter.
Right.
So he's going in. There's people like there's like dudes like dancing together and listening to music together, and one guy got chained up in like a sex dungeon, and Ignatius is like mad because they think they're torturing him, and like our political party can't be torturing people. Uh, he he's about to make a speech. He goes into the kitchen where he meets these three lesbian women who attack Mancuso. They also attack him, and he leaves before anything can really happen, but they come back. He then gets up to make a speech, and he like unplugs the record player from the wall, and he's like stands up and starts yelling at them about how they have to get political. And everyone there just thought they were there for a party, and are like, "This is like killing our buzz. Like, get rid of this guy."
Yeah.
And like nobody wants to listen to what he's saying, and he's like droning on about like weird medieval politics stuff. Like it makes no sense, and they're not happy. And then so they decide to throw him out. They turn the music back on. Everyone starts dancing, and then he's mad because no one's paying attention to him, and Dorian won't listen to him. So he's like kind of standing off to the side. And then the lesbians find him, and they're like, "Oh, don't worry, bud. Like somebody will come up and dance with you." And he's like, he starts insulting them, saying like that's not what he cared about. So then they push him really hard, and he knocks over the guy Dorian was dancing with.
Mm-hmm.
So then Dorian like tries to kick him out of his apartment, and then the lesbians basically like drag him out and say like, "If you're still here in 10 minutes, we're gonna find you and beat you up." So he decides to go to the bar that the pornography came from, like the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when he gets there, he finds out it was the same bar he was in before. And he's afraid he's gonna run into the like Nazi landlady or whatever he called Lanolly.
Right.
But Jones is like, oh, and the whole story, Jones has been like trying to sabotage his boss for like underpaying him,
Mm-hmm.
and he keeps hearing stories about this like fat mother in a green hat. And when he sees Ignatius, he's like, oh, here he is in the flesh. And everywhere Ignatius goes, he completely ruins everything. And Jones has been hearing this. So he knows if he can get him in the bar, he's going to like destroy Lanolly's business. And that's exactly what happens. Ignatius is dragged in to watch this strip show where he believes he'll see his Boethius-loving woman from the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And once he's inside, it's Darlene, the stripper from before. She's on stage, and she's worked out this act with a cockatoo, where the cockatoo pulls out little rings on her clothes to like rip open that portion of clothing.
Right.
It's like a strip act that she like came up with. And so she's getting ready to do this act, but then the bird sees Ignatius's golden earring because he's still dressed up in his pirate costume.
No.
So then the bird jumps from her down to Ignatius's hat and starts trying to rip off his ear. And so he's like screaming and bellowing. Lana's trying to kick him out because she recognizes him and like, get him out of here. He's running around knocking over tables, trying to get this bird off his head.
Of course.
Everyone's like chasing and running around. They get outside, and then Mancuso had been following Ignatius around because he started to realize Ignatius keeps running into all these characters. And oh no, because the old man was convinced that Ignatius was becoming a communist.
Right.
So he told Mancuso to follow Ignatius to find out if he was a communist, or to meet his communist comrades or whatever. Well, so then Mancuso's there. Ignatius almost trips into the street in front of a bus, and then Jones grabs him and pulls him off into the street, and Ignatius passes out. And then he faints in the middle of the street. The next morning, he wakes up in the hospital with his mom there. His mom is furious because, and then she shows him a newspaper that shows like, pornography ring busted at a night of joy. Mancuso's the hero because he found out this operation. Jones was the one who showed him like where the supplies were being kept. Lana Lee's arrested. The three lesbian women came looking for Ignatius, and then they attacked Mancuso, and they got arrested as well. Like basically, so many characters from the book ended up in this last spot together. Oh, Darlene has like a glamorous shot of her wearing her like fancy dress before anything's been torn off, with the bird on her shoulder. And then in the like, there's like three pictures, and the middle picture is Ignatius laying on the ground in front of the bar, and he looks like a drunk that's been passed out. So the mother is like, okay, you've dishonored our family, you're getting drunk, passing out. The hot dog vendor sees the... Actually, it goes through every character in the book. There's like 10 asides in a row. The hot dog vendor sees these pictures and fires Ignatius. The mother's not happy about that. He can't even hold down a hot dog vendor job. The Levies see the picture. By this point, they're aware of the letter, and they're hunting for Ignatius because the company he sent the letter to is threatening to sue them for $500,000. But Ignatius never signed his name, so they need to interrogate him and get him to admit it. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on. But basically, Ignatius's mother has settled on she's going to call the mental hospital and get him taken away. That is the climax at the end of this book. So he's like trying to avoid getting sued by Levy and their thing, because Levy comes to talk to him, but he denies it right away, and he says it was Miss Trixie who wrote the letter because she was bitter that they wouldn't let her retire.
Right.
I can't remember what else. Like it's such a cluster of all the characters like coming together. They're all getting like sort of happy endings, which is kind of funny. Like everything Ignatius touches turns to like absolute chaos, but like it's also kind of working out for a lot of these people. Like Jones is now like getting an award for service to his community, and there's people who want to hire him for a job. Mr. Levy wants to hire him. That's what it is. Mr. Levy, he's like, oh, you know what? If Trixie takes the fall for this, we can get her ruled incompetent because of her senility, and then not have to, like, nobody will be held liable for this money kind of thing. That's his plan. So he thinks that he's kind of getting away with this. Like everybody, Mancuso's now promoted. Darlene's been offered better jobs at like other dancing clubs. Lana Lee's in jail, but Lana Lee was awful the whole book. And then, and there's one character I totally forgot this whole book. His name is Professor Talc. Mm-hmm. He worked at the university that Ignatius used to go to. Ignatius used to constantly threaten him and sign all the letters as Zorro.
Right.
And then one of these letters got leaked to the student body, and the letter said something of like, we're sick and tired of you perverting young minds. So we've decided that we will hang you upside down by your underdeveloped testicles.
Oh.
And then, like, it's very much the language that Ignatius would use the whole book anyway. Like, he was always accusing everyone of being perverts or degenerates. But without the context of anyone knowing who Ignatius is, the students who find the letter assume that this professor's been, like, creeping on young students. So they're trying to get him fired. And it's like, it's such a weird aside because he never has any direct contact with Ignatius the entire book, but it keeps like going back to his office. Anyway, at the end, Ignatius is like, he's at home, his mother is freaking out, and then she leaves. And right before she leaves, she says goodbye and says like, I tried to help you every way I could, and then she leaves. And he starts to get suspicious because like she hasn't been nice to him and for as long as he can remember, which is 2 weeks. The whole book takes place over like 2 weeks. So he's like very suspicious, and then he finally puts it together that she's called the mental hospital on him, so he has to get out of there. Mm-hmm. So he's like searching around his room for any money, can't find any money for a cab, and then there's a loud knock at the door, and he's like, oh, it's either Mr. Levy coming to sue me, or else it's the hospital goons come to take me away. But it's actually Myrna Minkov, who was so distraught by his last letter that she drove all the way down to New Orleans. So at first he wants to get really mad at her and yell and like prove that she's been wrong the whole time. So also, she thinks everything he said in a letter has been a lie or a delusion so far. So like he's been bragging about his new job at Levy Pants, and then she's like, now I know that was a hallucination. There's no way you actually worked for a pants company and all this stuff. So at first he's like really mad at her and ready to yell at her, and then he realizes that he can like use this to his advantage. So he's like, oh yes, I have been locked in my room this whole time. My mother's been dating this fascist who thinks I'm a communist and like saying all this stuff. And he's like, please take me away, take me up to New York. And she's like, oh, wow, I can't believe it. I can finally help somebody. And he's like, yes, we got to go right now, though. And so he's trying to like get her to hurry. But then she's like, but what about all your books, all the things you've written? We can't just leave those behind. And he's like, I guess. And so she wants to stay and like pack up his room. And he's like trying to get her moving. Eventually they get in the car, and then once he thinks he's in the clear, he starts being a jerk again. And then she's like, wait a second, I'm tempted to pull over this car right now. And then he sees the ambulance go past, and he's like, no, keep going, I'm so sorry. And the book basically ends with him escaping to New York City with Myrna Minkov and never having to face any repercussions for all of his terrible actions the whole book.
Woof.
It's well, it's not like he's not evil.
Right.
So it's not like an evil person is going unpunished. He's like a real doofus. He's like a real character. He's a real he's kind of like, you know, those people who go like get kind of famous online because they're really weird.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like Ignatius is like the 60s version of that, where like I don't know, do you know who Chris Chan is?
Yes, absolutely.
He reminds me so much of Chris Chan. Like, a lot of the stories are very much like, this is something that Chris Chan would do.
Speaking of, have you heard of Down the Rabbit Hole?
I love it. Watch it religiously.
Okay, good, because they have a really good episode on Chris Chan.
Yeah.
So.
That's a good recommendation for our viewers out there.
Yeah.
Listeners. But yeah, so this book is surprisingly funny.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little convoluted in places, like with a lot of different characters and a lot of different asides. I would give it a 4 to 5.
Okay.
One thing though, like, he has these journal entries, and the whole point of the journal is it's supposed to be an awful book that he thinks is like groundbreaking.
Right.
But like writing an awful book satirically, it still comes across as awful. So like the segments of his journal are sometimes like 5 to 10 pages long, and they're just like boring, rambling speeches. They're like delusional versions of like scenes we've already seen before. Right. Yeah, they're like, the journals themselves really bring down the book. And also like, you know, some of the way they talk about like people of color or like gay people, like was maybe okay in the 60s or whatever, but feels a little weird now.
It's not okay now.
But I mean, like, even then, like, I wouldn't say this book is like racist or homophobic. Like, it's not specifically being mean to those people, but it's just some of the language not.
You just can't say it now.
Yeah, some of it hasn't aged well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would probably recommend this to most people.
Okay.
It is really funny. Like, it's hard to describe how funny it is. I think this would make a really good movie if they ever make it. There's kind of a big story about this where like they've been trying to make it into a movie for years. Like, they're going to make it to a movie in the 90s with Chris Farley, and then he died. I think before that they were maybe considering John Kennedy, and
then he died.
Then they were going to make it with Will Ferrell, and the contracts just never worked out. Right. I don't know if there's anything going on with it now, but like, I think they should make it into a movie. I think it'd be hilarious, especially if you like modernize some of the stuff, like took away some of the stuff that didn't age very well. I think it'd be really funny.
Right.
And you could probably scrap the Dr. Talc sections because they're kind of pointless.
Right.
But yeah, no, overall, I'd say it's a good read, and you should check it on out.
Cool.
Danny, where can people find us?
People can find us on Facebook, LiteraryAF. You can find us on Twitter, LiteraryAFPod. And you can listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and YouTube, LiteraryAF. Or you can send us email, LiteraryAFPod@gmail.com.
Great. And now we have a special outro requested to us by a listener.
Yep.
So here goes.